Well, howdy. Those of you that don't know me, I'm Mr. Brown, and I'm an IGIB English teacher, and I'm situated out here in Southeast Asia. I've got a fair bit of experience teaching the IB and the IG now over the last few years. And as it's almost go time and the exams are coming up in the next week or so, I'm recording a few videos to help my team with how to approach these big exams for both the IB and the IG. So I thought I'd just put these out there to share with whoever else might get some value from this. So that's what we're here for. And so if you stick around, we're going to be going through a quick revision of what the unseen poetry exam is all about, the basic types of questions that they're going to ask, how you might prepare. And if you stick around towards the end, we're going to go through maybe a reason why you're not doing as well as you might be on your unseen poetry exams or all your literature exams. Basically just a little bit of a hack that I find when I'm marking hundreds of essays. The better ones do something that the ones that are not quite on track are doing. So that's the plan, and you know who I am now. So hello and welcome back to all my team and to anyone else joining from out there. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to share, and in future I can possibly help you with that. So today, as I said, it is the unseen poetry exam, and we're going to be looking at what your game plan is, and it's only a few days away. So my players have pretty much gone through what their game plan is, I hope, and hopefully they've been doing the practice. I know a lot of them have. We just had our mocks, so I know that you should be ready, but hopefully you've revised and you're really thinking about what's your game plan, what you're going to do as you walk in those doors so that you can really do a absolutely top-notch job, even better than you did in your mocks. So let's just go through the unseen poetry exam. Those of you who maybe haven't quite got your head around it yet, most of you should. But what we should already know at this point, before the unseen poetry exam, is that you will face one poem and two question types. So the unseen poetry exam, one poem, two question types. You've got 1 hour and 15 minutes, which means pretty much 45 minutes for each response. So they're not looking for you to write your extended, well-developed, awesome essay response that you might be used to writing. It's an exam response. They're looking for you to get to the point, answer the question, find the ideas that answer the question, and then go very quickly through and get as much as you can on the page. Timing is part of it. Those of you who can get to the point quickly and can cover the whole poem are clearly going to do better than those of you that can't, but you can still do reasonably well as long as you can answer the question, go through and write a reasonable essay that gives us probably three good ideas, some good techniques mixed in there, and can write. We're looking probably a page and a half. When I'm marking, that's what I'm looking for. Tends to be what usually does okay. But that's what you should know at this stage, okay? And you've probably done that already. The two types of questions, my guys have gone through this quite a bit, so they know. We've got the general question, which is number one, which is kind of more the imagery question, we've been calling it, but we're going to call it the general question for today. But this one is more of a kind of what do you see when you read the poem? How does it make you feel? And it's kind of the question that's like, how does the poet make this poem moving? And that's basically what it's looking for. How does it make it a powerfully moving portrayal of something? It's all about how do you respond personally? What do you see with the imagery devices? What do you feel with the emotional devices, basically? So that one should be relatively easy if you've been practicing and preparing. And the second kind of question is more the focus question. And this one, they give you a theme or they give you an idea. Sometimes they do give you a technique and they say, this is the one thing we want to look at. And that one is kind of like, how does the poet present memory in the poem or something like that? It'll give you one idea, okay? And you need to go through and you're analyzing the language, the structure, and the effects, but answering a very specific question. So that's another way of breaking out. For my guys, it's generally been an imagery versus a theme. Another way we can break it down is kind of the personal response versus the direct question. Okay, either way, you get the idea. And I think you should by now understand the question types. So how do we prepare? We're in our last week, and by now you've had a fair bit of experience. You know how to prepare using hopefully Flirty. If you haven't, I'll put a link to my Flirty video down the bottom in the description. That might help some of you. You want to go through and you want to know all those areas. Okay, so the examiner is going to be looking across your two responses. You have a pretty good grounding in poetic language and poetic understanding. Flirty is something that you can use that will give you the whole gamut of ideas. So you probably want to make sure you have revised that and practiced it. And beyond that, I would practice under time conditions, looking at a bunch of poems and just putting yourself under the time condition. You can see those kind of questions that we have. Give yourself a what makes this poem a powerfully moving poem, and look for the things and what's your personal response, and look for those elements that really grab you on an emotional level or an imagery level. And then the other one is kind of what's the big idea or the big theme of this poem, and what are the techniques that help to develop that. And you can practice with lots of poems. I think most of you probably know how to find the past exams. There's banks of them online, which I question whether they're actually ethical, or they may not be within the realms of copyright. But past exams, or ask your teacher for past exams. You can also look at Songs of Ourselves, which is the IGCSE collection of poems, and they're all kind of at the level. And if you look at your syllabus, you should be able to see that there are whole collections of poems that you can study as the set text, and they would be great for you to use as practice. We might go through one or two of those in another video if we have time, but it's getting close. But my guys have studied those ones, and they're very good practice to get you up to level. So I would be practicing, put the timer on, use those kind of question templates, have a look at your poem, and then have a game plan. Develop your own game plan that works, and you should have thought about that by now. Something along the lines of this would be a reasonable game plan that I would be looking at, something that hopefully by now you've done a few times, but on exam day, you should know what works for you. When you open that exam, you should know this is how I approach it. I've done plenty of practice, and this is how I feel good with it. A game plan, if you haven't thought of one yourself, is possibly to go through the following. If it was me, I would probably open it up, read the poem twice, take the time. They're usually about a page long. They're not really that long. And you can read it through a couple of times, maybe 5 minutes, and read it through and let it hit you emotionally. Think about what's the author's purpose in writing this. How does he want you to feel? What does he want you to think? And as I've told my guys, one little trick is if it's really confusing, then lean into that. That's part of the effect. The poet wants you to be confused, and think about why he wants you to be confused. Otherwise, it's usually pretty straightforward in the exam, and they'll tell you what it's about. Make sure you read those instruction lines and make sure you read the question. They'll tell you what it's about. But I read it a couple of times. The second read through, I would be looking for those flirty elements, probably from the very first one. But that's one thing that we'll come back to in a while, is that you really don't want to just dive into flirty techniques straight away. And sorry, I'm having technical difficulties with this computer. You don't want to dive them straight away. I mean, form's important, and you're looking for that straight away. The language used is important. Imagery, rhythm, tone, and how you feel, very important. But I would suggest you take a little bit of time. First of all, what's the overall purpose? What's jumping out at you before you jump into pulling out every single line that you think you think we're looking for. So that would be one good point to start with. So once you've read it through a couple of times, you've highlighted the techniques that are being used, you can probably categorize them. Then maybe you annotate, you start to come up with a plan, consider what's the question asking for, how you might answer it, maybe make a little dot point plan. Think about, this is my answer, it's going to go in the introduction, and then these are the key ideas. I would go chronologically in an exam. I would just go, this is the main idea that the poem's all about, and the first thing that builds it is in the first stanza. These are the little techniques, these are the quotations that really stand out. Here's the next idea. It comes in stanza 2 or 3, and it's using these techniques to stand out, and it's really using these lines really popping off the page. That's the way that I would do it. And then after I've got my dot pointed plan, I've considered it, thought, have I got everything? Then I'd write my essay. And again, it's not a well developed, beautifully phrased, amazing essay. It is a 45-minute, well, once you've done the planning, probably a 30-minute, let's go. Here's my introduction. And then your body paragraphs, nice quotations embedded in. Hopefully, you're giving a big technique that goes with each one of those and amplifying with a few more. Great idea is to go, the big technique being used in this moment is symbolism, and the diction used also does this, connotation of this word, the tone with which it's presented. These are ways that you can amplify what the main technique is doing very quickly and easily. And personally, as a marker, I look at that and go, wow, that's really good. That's amplifying what you're doing. You've got 3 or 4 techniques instead of just one. And that's what the big time players do, in my opinion. And then at the end, your conclusion can be really short, but remember, bring it back to answering the question. So in the beginning, it's very clear, and at the end, it's very clear. And as you go through, you want to make sure that you are addressing the question. Okay. Some tips. Focus on how the poet creates the effect, not just what the poem says. Okay, so a phrase that would be great for you to use, and it's in the marking key. Generally, in the marking key, the idea of the poet intended something to happen. What's the purpose? The poet intended you to feel this, for you to think this, for this to be read in a certain way, and the reader responded in a certain way. You can rephrase that in your own language if you like, but the idea is when we're reading texts, all literature texts, that the author is doing it with a purpose in mind, and we are reading it and we're either getting that purpose and we're agreeing with it, we respond in the way they expect us to, or maybe we respond in a different way, or maybe we completely challenge what the author is saying. But that is a key thing, that if you want to go from the average response to the higher response, great little phrasing that you can put in, and it can be in all the way through. It can be in the start. The poet intended this to be powerfully moving by the use of the symbolism of fire, and the reader responds very strongly to this particular quotation of fire with, and then you get the idea. You can just keep powering through doing that throughout. Be precise in your language. You don't want to just be listing the techniques that are being used and being descriptive. You want it to be analytical, and you want to be the idea of the author uses, the author emphasizes, and it's done for an effect, and it answers the question in a very clear way. Don't panic at unfamiliar words or odd images. Trust your instincts. And again, if you're really confused, it's probably part of the poet's game plan. And trust yourself to say that this is really ambiguous, and here is possibly the reason why. And back yourself in. You might be wrong, but if you can back it up with the what's written, with the evidence, and you can discuss it and it makes sense, you can get points. And it's much better than just trying to ignore it. Okay, so as I said at the beginning, I promised here's a little bit of a hack, not really a hack, but a reason why you're possibly not doing so well. And I've seen this a lot. I've marked a lot of poetry exams and literature exams. This is great advice for any literature exam. Why you might not be doing so well is you're not confident. for one, and you're not confident in your reading of the poem, and you are diving too quickly into what you think the examiner wants to hear. Okay, so instead of taking your time and really going, what's the big picture? How do I feel about this poem? What has the author tried to tell me, and how do I respond to it? Especially in poetry, that's a huge part. And the really good players, the really big superstars that can write really good responses, they can tell the examiner, this is the big picture. This is how he tried to influence me, or she, the poet, tried to influence me. And this is what I bring to it. And this is how I feel about it. I'm not just going through and giving a shopping list and going, well, there's a symbol here, there's alliteration there, there's pathetic fallacy there, if that's not really part of the big answer, I'm going to be looking at it and say, okay, you're an all right student of poetry, but you're missing the big picture. So possibly why you're not doing so well is that you're not confident to say, this is my personal response to this poem. This is what's really important about this poem. This is the true answer. And zooming out first of all and really looking, what's going on? What's it doing? What's the purpose? Before you zoom in. It'll stop you from zooming in and saying in the first line, there's this great, short line, and it uses onomatopoeia and it uses assonance, which doesn't answer the question at all, which I see a lot of people doing. Instead of zoom out and really look for what's the big idea first of all, and what's really important about this poem. So a lot of students zoom in way too quick and look for what they think the examiner wants, instead of really looking for what do they get out of it, and what's the big idea, what's the real thing that grabs the reader of the poem. Okay, so final words. Hopefully that's really helped you. We are in the last week before the May exams. I know there are exams running all the time, and this may help you at other times, but for the May exams, my guys are going into it this week. So my last words are, keep practicing, practice smart. When I say let the poetry speak, that's running into that final big message that we just went through there. What is the poetry saying? Don't just jump in and make don't just jump in and look for what you think we want. Go into there and say, what does this poem actually do? How does it influence me? What is going on? What's the big picture? And then go through and look for the ideas that back up what you're saying. Let your voice respond with confidence. You've got this. If you've done the work, then it's time to go in there and win. Make sure you've worked on your game plan and you're feeling pumped. Okay, I think I've gone way over the time I set for this, but just wanted to share some good advice, and all the best come exam day.